Heavy rainfall across the southeast is keeping us busy at the SCRFC. Will that pattern continue, or will we break the cycle? We'll answer that and more in the Southeast U.S. edition of the Water Resources Outlook. Well, this Water Resources Outlook is going to be a little shorter this week. We really haven't had a whole lot happen over the last 2 weeks. As you can see from our rainfall depiction here, this is the departure from normal for the last 14 days. And as you can see, we have a couple of spots that have seen much above normal rainfall as we've gotten typical afternoon-type thunderstorms over the southeast, afternoon and sometimes overnight. And you can see up near Charlotte in North Carolina, a spot in Alabama, North Georgia, a little bit in Florida. So most of it where they have heavy rainfall, we've had some flash flooding and so forth, but this is pretty typical for this time of year. Even the places that are below normal are only slightly below normal. So we haven't changed our pattern a whole lot through the summer. Again, we were wet during June and July. We're more normal for this time of year, at least for now. How has that affected our stream flow? Well, our friends at the USGS have provided this map for us, and as you can see, the green shows the normal flows for the rivers, and most of the southeast is in that category. As we get closer to the mountains, we're much above normal in that 90% level, and then there are some spots that are like that. There are very few that are below normal over the southeast, and that's good news as we've had plenty of water to work with. We really haven't had too much flooding. Most of the flooding that we've had has ended up near the coast now, as all that water that we had during the July time frame has moved down along the coast. So now what are we expecting for the next couple of weeks? Well, for the first week, this is from the Weather Prediction Center, and this is their forecast for the rainfall over the next week. And this goes to next Tuesday on August 14th. And as you can see, the rainfall along the coasts is not too much. You have North Carolina where we're showing somewhere in the 1.5 to 2 range. And then as we get into the Tennessee Valley, we have a little bit heavier rainfall further north of us. So really we're not expecting a significant rainfall, but we will have those afternoons and time periods where we have heavy rainfall, just like what we saw over the last 2 weeks. So at the RFC, we'll be watching that very closely to see how that impacts our rivers and to see how we deal with the flash flooding in those areas. As for a little bit more long-term, as we go through the 21st of August, you can see that we continue to be in a little bit of a wet pattern. It's showing above normal chances for rainfall over much of the eastern seaboard and all the way down into Florida. So we can expect as we get into the later end of the period that it will probably end up being pretty wet. Well, now that we've talked about the short and medium-term rainfall and what we can expect, now let's look at the long-term forecast. And we're going to talk about a couple more different things that may be affecting our area. Now, we're going to go all the way to Kamchatka, Russia, and look at the Shiva Luch volcano, which erupted back in the June time frame. I get this from Evelyn Browning-Garris, who has it in her Browning newsletter, and she talked a little bit about this, and even back last month she talked about how it would impact the southeast's weather. Well, here I'm showing a map to show you exactly where it is, and as you can see, it's up a good ways away from us. However, the flow from west to east would bring a lot of the ashes, especially the ones that went high into the atmosphere, probably over Canada and into parts of North America. And because of that, if you get cooler, dusty air where water can adhere to, and you have that warm, humid air, you kind of put those two together and you get heavy precipitation. And that was one of the predictions that was made last month, is that July would be a much wetter month, and it was. And so the impacts of this may continue into August and early September. So we may continue to have heavier rainfall over parts of the southeast because of that. So one other thing that we'll look at, and these are kind of the dust and so forth that's coming off of Africa. Now, we quite often look at the hurricane season to see what kind of air we have coming off of Africa, to see whether we'll have development of tropical systems in the Atlantic Ocean. Now, we're starting to get the beginning of the Atlantic hurricane season. We already had Dorian, which developed out there, and one of the things that we noticed was that even though it developed, it did not develop any more than a tropical storm, because we had all that dry Saharan dust in the air. So we look at these things to see if we're going to continue to get development. And right now, at least this is the current picture of what's going on, and it looks like that will continue at least for a while. So for the next few weeks, up until probably the middle of August, those hurricanes will probably not have a chance to form in that area. They would still have a chance to form in the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico, but not likely to form or at least develop into a larger storm in the Atlantic Ocean. So between those two things, we'll continue to get the rain, but it doesn't look likely, at least early in the period, that we'll have an active hurricane season. We'll have to wait till the end of maybe August and early September for probably more active weather. So let's look at the 1 month outlook. This came on July 31st, and we continue to stay wet. And this goes along with the forecast I talked about earlier, at least having something to do with the volcano out in Russia. So that would have at least a little bit of an impact. But again, the other part of it is the feedback loop. We have so much moisture in the area, and we continue to get hot in the afternoon, so we're going to continue to have rainfall on a day-to-day basis over most of the southeast. And that will continue also for the 3 month outlook, which we looked at in our last water resources outlook, and you can see that we will continue to stay wet, and it looks like it will be that way. Now, the break may come sometime in the November, December, and January time frame where it looks like we might be below normal. It's still too early to tell, but this is the forecast they have out. The issue that we'll have going into that time period is that we may have still been wet as we got into July and October time frame. So even below normal rainfall, because we start that part of the season wet, could cause some flooding. So we'll be watching that. We'll look to see how we transition from fall and into winter and how that's going to impact our winter flooding this year. So the bottom line for the southeast, in the short term, it looks like it will continue being wet over the southeast, although probably not overly wet. It doesn't look like it'll be abnormally wet. It looks like we'll have spots of above and spots of below normal. They'll end up in different places. So really kind of a normal type August with maybe just slightly more rainfall than expected. As we get into the long term, our peak of the tropical season, which will start around the middle of August, it'll start to ramp up about then, is just around the corner. Our next water resources outlook will be in part of that. And will it be active? It looks like the early part will not be too active, that it will be slow to come about. But once it does, it's very possible with all the warm water out in the Atlantic and the Caribbean that things could get very interesting. The next water resources outlook will be on August 20th, and with scheduling and everything else, it's possible that it might come the next week. We'll make sure and send out a notification to everybody to let you know when it's available. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Water Resources Outlook. Remember, you can find much of this information at our website at weather.gov/SERFC. Also, come and visit our Facebook page where we will provide notifications of products we issue. Also, feel free to comment and pass that information along. And if you have any questions or comments, please contact me at the email address todd.hamel@noaa.gov.